about 2018, I'm thinking,
Yeah, that sounds about right.
something like that. So gone through a lot of changes in that amount of time, but I thought it might be helpful just to do a kind of a high-level look at how the pension fund works. When I report a couple times a year, I bring the actual numbers, and we'll do that again shortly, because we're right in the middle of our valuation for last year. But thought it might be helpful just to give you a quick overview if it's not familiar to you. The Chattanooga Pension Fund was founded in 1949, so it goes back quite a long ways. It's not entirely unique, but a little unusual, in that 6 of the 8 trustees are sworn officers. We've got 3 police and 3 fire on the board, in addition to myself as city council appointee and Weston Porter as the mayor's appointee, with a staff of about 2.5 employees. The role of the pension trustees, myself and the other members, is basically oversight of the fund. You know, there are certain regulations and laws we have to comply with, in addition to setting direction for the investments of the fund. It's part of our job to hire and supervise the actuary who does the work on the fund, and we do that. We also have an outside investment consulting firm that actually does most of the research and recommendations, and then we approve and move forward from there. So I don't think this is going to be real news for anybody, but the difference between a pension fund and say a 401k, those are called defined contribution plans. You put money into your 401k, you invest it. It's entirely up to you to do it during your lifetime and to save up enough to retire on, as opposed to a traditional pension or defined benefit plan, which is what the city has, and what I know the city also has a 403B and 457, I think. But with a defined pension, a defined benefit plan, the retiree's salary is based on some percentage formula of their last however many working years. And it's up to the fund and the employer to fund it and invest it such that that obligation is met in their retirement. So you can see over the years that dotted line is the progression of people who have pension funds. The left-hand scale is the percentage of workers who have a plan at all. Once upon a time, there were more pensions than 401ks. That's certainly not true today. As you can see, the light blue line at the top is 80% of people who have a plan at all have a defined contribution plan, a 401k type plan. The retirement plans that are pension funds, only about 20%. And as you can see from this graph, that top dotted line is public administration. That would be municipalities, state, local governments, and police and fire. So that's predominantly where we still see pension funds. And the primary reason for that is first responders, on average, have lower life expectancies, as you can imagine, because they're exposed to more hazards. They have typically a shorter working lifetime within their professions. A lot of times they'll go get a second job after retirement, but the theory here was they have less time to save up. 401ks are more difficult for them to amass enough assets. I can work 40 or 45 years, but a typical firefighter, police, 25 to 30. And of course, because of the physical demands, especially in the fire, they're less likely to be able to work the same duration of employment. Now, you know, over time, that's changing as we get better equipment, safety improves, and so forth.
So I was gonna ask, I think that is changing. Is there any data that shows what the difference between life expectancy now, let's say for someone who's actively employed now,
Right?
versus even like 20 years ago? Because I know one of the things that we've done, I think that should make us a difference anyways, we've started furnishing a second set of turnout gear.
Yep, exactly.
And there's a lot of, I guess, what am I trying to say, preventative medicines now. You know, we've got the health clinic down here
Right.
that they go through a physical every year.
Absolutely.
And they look for certain things, early detection and things like that. So
We're much more aware of it, more heightened, and more response to in terms of equipment and so forth.
So, you know, one of my thoughts is one of the challenges to this defined benefit is the fact that I think the data would probably show that firefighters are now living longer. I know we certainly have now for the first time, right, more firefighters on the pension, drawing as opposed to paying in.
Right here.
So,
You go back to you're right on point. Go back to 2015, that red circle there, you can see that ratio 0.92. So there were more actives, which is the dark blue, than retirees. And now come out to 2024, and that pink line shows you that ratio. So now there's 110 retirees for every 100 actives. If you look at that far right-hand column, it's really almost 1.1 this year. So you're exactly right. There are more retirees than actives. And if you think about the analogy of Social Security, 1960 there were 5 workers paying in for every retiree, and today it's about 2 to 1. It's the same reason that Social Security has financial challenges, as the ratio of retirees to workers has been growing.
so, and my concern is this, what does the projections look like on further out?
Yep.
In the realm of even contributions that
Sure.
the city is making? Because that, if that, well, I'm gonna say and I guess the pot's not really shrinking paying into it, it's just that the pot is growing that's now drawing from it.
That's right.
So what does that difference look like, and how do we make up that difference?
That's a great question. If it's okay with you, I'll hold that for just a couple of minutes, because I have a couple of slides on that very topic, on
Okay.
how, excuse me, how we actually go about determining the city's contribution and the trends for that contribution. I mean, just to cut to the chase, it's a big nut to crack. The city contributes a lot. They contribute roughly 50% of payroll, total. Now, that includes the employee's contribution is 11%, so the city's contribution is around 35% of payroll to the pension.
What is that number right now, do you?
I have it on a slide a little later on off the top of my head. I want to say it's around 26 million total. But we'll get there and I'll be able to answer that question.
And that's on a yearly basis,
That's a
not,
yearly basis, that's right.
that's not any infusion of,
Right.
yeah, okay.
Now, I will say this, every year, and this is, there's tons of detail here, we can spend more time later. But the process is, every year we sit down with the actuary, and the actuary makes a whole bunch of assumptions. How long is everybody gonna live, to your point? And our actuary will have statistics on life expectancies.
When will that be?
We'll get it probably in June for the last year. It takes them a long time to do the,
Oh,
well, I mean.
it takes a whole year to,
Yeah, well, we're not on a fiscal year on the plan, we're on a calendar year. So we close out our calendar year in December 31.
oh, okay.
And then we adjust it to the city's fiscal year.
Okay.
For the contribution.
Oh.
So we're just now closing out our year, ending 12/31. But,
Okay.
so every year we sit down and we look at the changes in assumptions, because the actuary has to project how many, what's the active payroll gonna be? What's the retiree population gonna look like? And every 5 years, we do an experience study, because it picks up those differences in life expectancy. So all of those other assumptions get baked in addition to the financial performance of the fund. If we've lost money last year, then we have to make that up in later years. Now, we do that over a 30-year time frame. But all that to say, each year we recompute the city's what's called the recommended contribution in order to reach that long-term goal of fully funding.
and you won't have that until June?
Yeah, May or June, something like that, typically when he finishes. Because they do a full-blown study. Now, our actuary, Siegel, does one-off sort of estimates, like we did twice with the pay increases. He produced a report, what's the impact gonna be, and so forth.
Do you know, and I'm asking a lot of questions.
No, that's okay.
From last year's report, how was that in relationship to what the city budgeted? Do you know, do you remember? Like, what did they say our contribution should be? What was our contribution?
Oh, the city is, as far back as I can go, for the last 20 years, with one exception, the city has always made at least that minimum contribution. They've always come pretty close to hitting it, and it's usually a little over. There was one year that there was some blip in the accounting or something that came a little under, but.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because our budget will be pretty much baked by the time we get this report, if it's June. So gonna have to be making some kind of an assumption of what it would be.
Yeah.
Without having to have the actual numbers, right?
And that's a good question, and honestly, because I'm not involved in the preparation of that estimate, they probably come up, what's budget season is like?
We usually get our budget books in,
April, late April.
Yeah.
well,
If not-
May,
yeah.
by May anyway.
So he'll have that to you, he just won't have the full-blown report, but he'll have the recommended contribution. Let me get there.
Okay.
Show you a couple things real quick.
All right.
So, I mean, this is a slide that just tells you all the things that the actuary has to do, right? He's got to guess. How many people are gonna die in the next 30 years? How old are they gonna be when they die? You know, that's, I
So
mean,
he's got a crystal ball.
he
Yeah.
does, much better than me. And he's got to tell you what the market's gonna do too.
God,
Yeah.
I need to talk to him.
Well, and he's always wrong, I'll tell you that.
He's like the weatherman.
Yeah, 'cause we know we're always wrong, right? We just, what you wanna do is build a fence around your errors.
Don't tell him I said that.
Yeah, that stays right in this room, right? So, I mean, that's all the things the actuary does to make these projections, and they come up with what's called the actuarially accrued liability. So what that number is basically is, you take every active and retired police and fireman in the city, and you know how old they are, and you estimate when they're gonna die. I mean, statistically using tables, right? And so you know, as of today, you know theoretically the total accrued liability for the next 30 years of everybody who's either active or retired. If you can guess close enough how long they're gonna live. But theoretically, that's how all insurance is done, right? Doing actuarial assessments. And you know when the timing's gonna be. So you know that a brand new recruit who just started and he's 1 year out of the academy, a new, a rookie cop, is gonna work 30 years and he's gonna retire and he's gonna live 18 more years statistically, theoretically. So we got, 48 years of liability as of today that he's already accrued because he's worked a year, right? So we take all those liabilities that we know about and they're way off in the future. Some of them are 48 years out, and you discount them back to the present at the assumed rate of return, which today is 6.75%. Used to be a lot higher than that, but that's a little more realistic. We were overestimating our future returns for 15 years, going all the way back to the late 90s, and weren't attaining it. So we add all that up, and that's a big old number. Today it's $622 million. And what that means literally is if you just stopped everything, if we no longer had any firemen or policemen and we no longer contributed, but we still owed them those benefits on the same schedule, it would take $622 million to cover all that. If it could be invested in the long term at 6.75%. So that's how we start. We add up all those future liabilities in 2026 dollars, okay? So the way to think of, you're discounting it from the future, but really the other way to think about it is, what would I have to deposit today to have that amount of money 48 years from now? And 47 and 46, and each year we have different payouts. That's where we start.
Okay.
And I was gonna show you a numerical example, but you don't need that. That's, theoretically, you understand the concept. The second thing to understand is that the actual results in the stock market and the bond markets is highly volatile, as you can see. And that number over there with the big red circle around it is what got us in trouble. That was 2008 when the fund lost 31% in 1 year. Now, everybody lost a lot that year. That was the great financial crisis. And the stock market was down 30-something%. The bond market was down. But, to be quite honest, I won't say it's before I was born, but it's before I joined the fund. The fund lost more than the average pension fund that did, 31%. The average fund lost 20-ish, 22-ish, something like that. So that was a big old hit. But the point of this graph is that the dark blue line is the actual market results. The light blue line is what the actuaries do. They basically average those results over 5 years to smooth it out. And the reason is, if they didn't do that, and you have a 30% loss, we come to the city the next year and say, we need $47 million in funding to get us back to that level. So actuaries will smooth that. That's the light blue line. And that's the number we work off. That's called the actuarial value of the assets.
Chris, let me ask you something. When we say, and I get it, I know, When we say it lost 30%, that's on paper.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
If you don't sell anything, you haven't lost anything. So why didn't, as the stock market recovered, why didn't we recover sooner? Did we start shifting assets and have a panic sale, and that's what we did?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be careful how I put it, because I don't want to throw shade on any decisions that were made in the past. They were made in good faith. The idea at the time was we had too much exposure to the stock market, and we lost a lot.
Yeah.
Coming out of that, now remember, 2008, 09, the picture still looked pretty bleak. You know, how long did it take the housing market to recover, you know, from those depths? It was, you know, a long time. There were still foreclosures going on into 2010, 2011. So the theory at the time was that there were hedge funds that were promising above average returns. Now they carried above average fees, so the funds shifted some money into hedge funds at the time. Just at the time that hedge funds started underperforming. And instead of their history of beating the market, they underperformed the market for the next decade. And it took us 10 years to unwind that. So you're right, we did not get it all back. In fact, if you think about that 30% drop, and we had a 20%, 18% gain the next year, but you needed to get 45% to get back even, right? If you lose 50%, you have to make 100%
You gotta
the
make
next year to
100%
get
to make
back.
it up, yeah.
Right? So we never did get back there. It's been a slow climb out. And I will show you in a minute, our trajectory looks pretty optimistic based on those same assumptions that we've made, which we think are more realistic than they were 10 years ago. But I hope that answers that question at least.
Well, I
Why
mean,
we
the-
didn't spring back so.
The bottom line is they must have they sold basically and got out of
Yeah.
a lot of what they were in, and that became a loss.
They did, but Chip, I'll tell you one other thing though about the way I tend to look at this is, it's technically true that you locked in the loss when you sold it. But it's also true that something changed. And some of the stuff you held, you don't need to be holding anymore because it's no longer attractive. So you do have to be active in switching those around. And the fact that in a pension fund, there's no taxation. Ordinarily, an individual, if you're down on, you know, if you have a large capital gain, you're gonna hesitate to sell something, even if you think you need to sell it because you gotta pay income tax. We don't have that situation here. So the markets and the world looked substantially different in 2009 than they did in 2006. And the same investments were no longer appropriate. So there was some adjusting that needed to be made. And it, you know, intellectually, it's true that you're locking in a loss when you sell something, but you're also missing out on something that has a better, more attractive return if this thing no longer works. And that's where we were in '06. I hope that makes some sense.
In other words, they weren't necessarily in index funds, they were
They were not in index funds.
not in index
primarily,
funds
that's
that
correct.
came back.
They were in actively managed funds, and as I said, the
Okay.
landscape had shifted dramatically by then, so they were no longer appropriate. Now, the decision to go into hedge funds, which have very high fees, worked against us, as it turned out. As I said, they were making decisions in good faith, and a lot of pension funds were going into hedge funds at the time. It was just, as it turns out, poor timing in retrospect. So we are no longer in any hedge funds. We are about 50% indexed in bonds and stocks, and the rest is in semi-active management. And then we've got some investments in things like, which are kind of bond substitutes like real estate, timber and farmland, and things that are perpetual income generators. So it's a much less leveraged portfolio today. One other thing I will tell you is, coming out of that decline, that next 7 or 8 years really, when we had a big hedge fund exposure, our average expenses in the fund were probably a little over 1% on average annually. And we're at around 0.5% now, all in, including administration. Now that, I mean, even for an individual, 0.5% fee on average is pretty darn attractive. You know, you can buy a cheap index fund for almost nothing, but a balanced portfolio, even for an individual with no oversight, no management, 25, 30 basis points is pretty good. We're paying 0.5%, 50 basis points all in, including the administration of the fund, and paying the investment consultant and the actuary. So That's one thing we're really proud of. We shaved more than 0.5% off our expense ratio. And that, over 30 years, makes a real difference. It's a big deal. So, before I move on, is that okay? The third line, that purple line, that's the assumed rate of return, and we've kind of dragged it down from, it doesn't show because the scale is so small, but the very bottom line, our assumed rate of return in '06 was 8%, and we've gradually reduced that. And what that means is the rate at which we discount those liabilities back to the future, if you use a smaller rate, that number gets bigger because that's in the denominator. So it means our liability goes up. It also means the city's contribution goes up when you compute it. But that's the only way to get back to even Steven. So that's what that graph is trying to demonstrate.
I didn't realize it took 2 years for the stock market to bottom out. 2020 was COVID, right?
It was. And then 2022 was a really bad year. Wasn't as bad as '06, but the stock market was off 22% that year and the bond market was down about 16%. And if you remember what happened, 22 was the year that inflation spiked to 9%.
Oh, yeah.
And the Fed raised rates very aggressively.
Yeah.
And it whacked the stock market and the bond market. You know, we went from basically 0% to 5.5% on the Fed funds rate. Mortgages went from 2.5% to 7 and change, or 8-ish. So when you raise rates that fast, mathematically it kills your bond portfolio. But it also kills stock market returns because of the expected future cost. You're discounting everything back at a much higher capital cost. So yeah, 2022 was a really bad year, but 23 was good, and 24 was good, 25 was good, and I'll show you our actual results here in a second. But yeah, it was, COVID was a bad year. It bounced quickly out of COVID because so many people were working from home and they weren't driving and they were spending less on transportation and work clothes, so they spent more on Amazon.
Yeah.
And the economy bounced pretty hard. So now, if that accrued liability, which I mentioned was $622 million, roughly estimated based on preliminary numbers at the end of, or at the beginning of this year, if that number is bigger than what's in the fund, which it is, that deficit is the unfunded liability, and that's where we come into this idea of a funded status or funded ratio. The ratio of the fund balance divided by the accrued liabilities is the funding ratio. So as we sit here today, we're just a hair under 60%. We got back above 60 when the city made their contribution last year, but then the estimate for the raises, hey, how are you coming? The estimate for the raises knocked us back down again. So, but we're in the neighborhood. We're really close to 60%. So that's encouraging. But that's what, when we talk about a funded ratio, we're talking about the fund balance, what's in there now, divided by that accrued liability at any point in time. So here you can kind of see, I'd mentioned the liability is $622 million. The actuarial value of the fund, that smooth 5-year average, was 370. So you do the math, the unfunded liability is $252 million, or about 59.5%. That's the funded status, I should say. So, you know, 60 cents out of every dollar of future liabilities is funded. It's in the fund. Now, we've talked about this before in other council meetings. 60% is kind of the threshold below which they really pay close attention, and David Lillard starts calling, and I stay in touch with him. I keep him apprised of what's going on. But as we hit that 60% threshold, and there's a game plan to pull out of the ditch, then I will mention, just for comparison purposes, when I joined, I guess shortly after, the year after I joined the board, that number was 46%. The funded ratio was 46% on a market value basis. And this is the actuarial basis, but I'll say, the smooth, but we're almost exactly equal. Our actuarial value and market value as of this year are almost right on top of each other, because we've had pretty good market returns and those two lines have converged. So we can kind of talk either or right now, and they're pretty similar. But
Chris, you mentioned something that I think a lot, and we sort of had this discussion last year during budget when a couple of new council people was talking about how far behind on pay raises we were.
yes, right.
And they said, how did we get here? But what you have to take in consideration is every time we give pay raises, that funded percentage goes down.
That's
And we
right.
were really fighting a kind of a two-edged sword, because every time we give pay raises, we lose ground on our funding percentage. So,
Right.
I mean, we were at such a critical level. I know when I took office, and it was shortly after that you became on board,
Yes.
you know, our main goal was to get that funded percentage up, which almost means you have to starve the salary increase, portion
Right.
of it.
Right. And
Because
then that
you just-
creates its own problems,
And
right?
that creates its own problem.
Yeah. And let me, while you're on that topic, let me just show you, I'm going the wrong way. This was my example. I said, let's assume, just for illustration, because I don't know where everybody's coming from on this whole idea of discounting a pension liability. But my hypothetical one-man plan here, okay? So a firefighter retires today and his pension is $45,000 a year, and just ignoring COLAs, just make it simple. And he's expected to live 18 years. So we're gonna pay him 45 grand every year for 18 years. And the way we calculate that liability today is we take year one, 45,000, and discount it back to today, 1 year. So you take 45 divided by 1.0675. And so if you deposited 42,000 today and earned 675, it would be 45,000 next year, and you could write him his check. And then the next year, the 45,000, if you deposited today, it would be 39,000, would grow over 2 years, and so forth. So the $45,000 in year 18 would cost you $13,000 today and grows 18 years compounded at 6 3/4. So that's the way that works. That's the math. Well, if you add it all up, the liability is $460,000 for that one firefighter who retires today. Now, Chip, to your point, if you give that guy an 18% raise, and that 45,000 goes to like 53,000, that number at the bottom goes from 460,000 to 570,000. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Those two big raises were necessary, in my opinion, to retain and attract. But it worsens the funded status overnight without any other changes, even though you haven't paid a dime of it yet, because you've increased the future liabilities.
What's those saying, starve a cold, feed a fever, or
One of
something like
those,
that?
one way or
I mean,
the
it's
other.
kinda-
Yeah,
It's kinda
exactly.
like that, really.
That's
I mean,
right, exactly. So, and it's worth noting too, that the actuary makes projections of salary increases every year. That's part of the calculation. But since we haven't been doing it, there hasn't really been anything to estimate. The actuary knows, you just kind of look at historical trends. So when you did the big raise in '21 and the big raise in '25, those two added together were pretty substantial changes to the accrued liability, and therefore to the city's contribution and so forth. So you're exactly right about that. There's a consequence to everything. Now, over time, the good news here, that number we looked at before, where there's so many more retirees than actives, that we're in a period of time right now demographically where that's the baby boom generation is going off into the sunset, and they're gonna pass away eventually. And bless their hearts, Gen X is the smallest generation, and they're gonna have to pay my bills in retirement. And then comes, the millennials and Gen Z, and they're a much bigger generation. So demographically, 15, 20 years from now, we're in the backside of that. We got fewer retirees and more workers. But, election cycles are longer than 20 years, right? And budget cycles are longer than 20 years, and it's hard to keep that in mind. But that demographic pyramid kind of reverses a little bit 20 years down the road.
But now, according to the chart that we saw, who was at the Chambers luncheon? Some charts that they showed.
Oh, you're talking about Dave Altick?
Yeah,
From
when it was
Shell.
showing that
It showed
the
our
birth rate is like,
birth
no
rate
new
going-
babies last year.
And if we don't have,
Yeah.
immigration,
Because I
Right.
forget
We'll
this
be-
is an immigrant country.
we'll have less people.
The workforce will contract.
The workforce will
It
contract.
may contract this year
But you gotta do it right.
because of negative net immigration. However, I'm not talking about babies born today. I'm talking about people who are already born, who are 22, 24 years old. You're right. You go on down another generation, we're back in the soup. But, demographically, 20 years from now, the picture gets much brighter for another generation.
Okay, so let me ask an unpopular
please.
question, but a
No,
question I
absolutely.
get asked all the time from, my constituents is about, and I don't bring it up much because I support fire and police pension, but the question is, you know, because it stays, what is the, okay, so we at 59.50% right now as the unfunded liability. Our goal is 60%, is that right? What's the goal?
Well, our immediate, kind of the
I
threshold.
mean, 100% is the
The
goal.
the goal is
100%.
80, well, it's 80%.
80%, okay,
It's
so,
unrealistic to say 100%.
Right,
If
but-
you're
And
at-
if you're
at 80
100% funded, you have too much in the
Yeah,
fund.
if you're at
Okay.
80%, you're,
that's solid,
That's
you're
right.
solid.
Exactly.
80%, so,
And there is a glide path for that. Now, you know, and Dr. Acuff had been working on some projections and our actuary too, and they're at somewhat of a variance, and we'll rectify, you know, we'll coordinate those numbers eventually. But just based on our actuarial assumptions, I can even get there and show you what our actuary projects is that we'll hit that 80% funded level by around 2039, 2040, something like that.
okay, so we're close. Well,
Yeah, I mean, the trend is good. Now, all of this, remember, this is all
Right.
projections.
Right,
And there's no way to project another negative 20% in the stock market. We know we're gonna have it.
Right,
But we're also looking at longer-term averages.
Right.
And the long-term return on the stock market is give or take 9.5 to 10%.
right,
We can't be all in stocks because of that 32% loss we saw. And, you know, we have to be balanced, but an average balanced portfolio can earn, you know, between 6 and 8%, and our assumed rate is 6.75. Back in 1992, our assumed rate of return was 9%. I mean, that was just
Yeah,
whacked
that's-
out, but everybody was coming off the heady 1990s with the dot-com, and then we had 3 years in a row of double-digit losses. 2020, 21, 22 were all double-digit losses, and 21 was minus 20%. So the stock market lost 45% of its value over 3 years.
okay,
We can't afford to do that. So that's why we balance the portfolio. So at our current rate, assuming again that every year we recompute the city's contribution, and it's a moving target, right,
Right.
depending on stock market returns. But that glide path, according to the actuary, gets us to 70% in 2033, at which point we can restore part of the COLA, and 2080 we can restore the rest of the COLA.
okay,
So that's our glide path. I will tell you that when we looked at this, before the raises, our glide path was 2038 and 2032. So even the two raises only cost us a year, because the stock market returns have been a little better than predicted since we dropped that rate of return.
okay,
So let me, actually, while we're on that, let me just show you, this is a snapshot of what the fund has actually done in the last year. So if you just look at the top line, that's gross, ignoring fees and expenses. That year-to-date column, the fund earned 14.9%. Now, that's pretty darn good for a balanced fund. We're about 60, you can see 65% in stocks, and the rest is in bond-like assets. So 65-35, give or take, allocation. And that number in parentheses, 29, that's the percentile ranking. So we were in the top 29% of all public pension funds for 2025. We want to stay around 50% because we don't want the bigger swings that comes with more risk. But even going back to the 5-year average, we're right about in the middle of the pack, which we're very happy with. But anytime we're below 50, means we're in like the 3-year average, we're in the top 40% of all pension funds. So returns have been pretty good on average over the last 5 years, and that's helped us get back on that glide path to 70 and 80% funded status.
okay. So what would it look like to, if we, would it be reasonable, and I'm asking because this is something that I've heard a couple of constituents mention,
Of course.
but to switch over to, like, everyone to a 401k, what does that look like? What would that entail? I know, we're at unfunded liability right now, it's at $252 million. And so, and you said if we stop right now, we would need $622 million, and that 252 is where we're we're
Right.
short at, in the
Yep.
gap. So what would that look like? Not that I'm advocating for it, but I
know,
think
that's
it's
a-
really.
that's exactly the
It's-
question to
it's-
ask.
It's just
Yeah.
one of the questions that I
Sure.
get often, and I've asked here and there, got all kind of numbers. So it's good to get these numbers, but what does that look like to, transition that over, and is that something, how difficult would it be, how much would it cost?
Yep, no, your question is right on point, because that question gets asked all the time with funds that, I will just back up for context. The city of Dallas Police and Fire is 30% funded. We're not-
Dallas,
we're-
Texas?
Yeah, Dallas Fire and Police is 36% funded.
Oh,
Chicago is 26% funded. State of Illinois is 30% funded, so, they still survive because they're paying in real time out of tax dollars. We're not, we can't do that. So let me address your question directly. Really kind of 2 or 3 answers. Number one is, in order to convert over, you've got to make up that unfunded difference
that's what I
somehow,
thought,
right?
okay.
Now, how do you do that? There are a couple of ways to go about it, but you've got to take care of people who are 20 years into their career. And you're gonna try to transition them into something else, and when they signed up, they were promised a pension. So, and it's not to say that those things can't be changed, that happens. It's very difficult, and the state of Tennessee has laws on how to go about doing that. I don't know what they entail. Some states forbid it. I don't think we do, but you've got to make a transition, and the transition is extremely costly. Somehow or other, you've got to get people who have a pension and are vested in that pension, and they have an accrued benefit of, let's say, $30,000 a year in the future. How do you give them a big enough lump sum today to equate in a 401K to the same kind of income in retirement? The second question is, you're putting it all on their back to make the investment decisions in the 401K. Now, you can give them tools, you can give them funds inside the pension fund and so forth. You're also relying on them to fund their own. The city matches maybe a contribution, but 401K means you gotta put some skin in the game too. The police and fire are doing that. They're contributing about 10 or 11% of their pay into the fund. But that's because they don't have any choice, and some will choose to not defer anything if they're, living check to check. So then the question becomes, and this is a philosophical question, that, I'm just not opining, just throwing it out there, is, do we owe first responders something a little bit more than we owe,
Absolutely,
me if I'm working in the finance office?
absolutely.
Is there a question of an additional obligation, kind of like veterans benefits? Veterans are entitled to additional benefits over and above what I am entitled to as somebody who never served. So that's the sort of the moral question in whether to retain a pension fund.
Are there hybrids that combine the two that other
There are.
cities use that you might could tell us about?
There are, in fact, Chattanooga has a 457, and I may have a 403B too, and some of the more far-sighted first responders are participating in that too. They're sucking more money away, and they're making their own investment decisions. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
And there are hybrids, and there are cases where, there are really two cases. One is, there are cities and states and municipalities that have just had no choice but to dump their pension fund and somehow either float a bond issue or do something to help the transition, because they just can't sustain. Our fund, we think, is sustainable. The second thing is that in Tennessee, smaller municipalities are part of the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System.
Yeah.
Oh,
The problem with that transition is that the benefits are less favorable, and then you gotta go through, may or may not recall, 2014, were you on the council at the time?
Well, yeah, I came on in 2013.
Yeah, so you went through that pretty unpleasant
Oh, yeah.
transition period where we had to take some benefits away. Now, again, I wasn't involved either, but obviously read the papers, and,
Well, that's when we did away with the COLA.
yes, right,
Well, I say did away with it.
we limited the COLA,
We
yes,
made changes to it.
exactly. So,
limited the COLA from the,
Well,
From the
pension
pension.
plan.
so that, yeah, they used to get an automatic 3% every year,
Pension every year, okay,
but because we were so far behind,
right.
it was eating our lunch. So we basically made a revision that, we came up with terms. When it got to 70% funded.
Oh, okay.
Then they got a portion of that COLA back, and then once it hit 80,
Then it
they
fully come
would, they
back.
would fully come back.
Okay.
And the way the legislation reads right now, that the deal that they cut was that, I think you're right, it was an automatic 3%, but the way it reads now is it a maximum of 3%. But if the CPI is 2, they get 2.
Oh, okay.
So, but they only get 1.5 right now.
Yeah.
Because that was part of the restructuring, and
Right.
that was fair. I mean, that's, you gotta make the thing work. So, Chris, converting to the Tennessee plan, the Tennessee Retirement Fund, is what some cities have done who just couldn't sustain the pensions. But then you got another similar fight on your hands with the actives having to give up significant benefits to go into the Tennessee system.
Let me ask you this, would be advantageous of us to consider, going back to the, the moral obligations that we have to those who are in sworn positions, if we reserve the pension fund only to sworn officers, fire and police, and then reserved positions, like the council or, like you said, in the finance office, to some other form of retirement plan, such as a 401k or something
Yeah.
like that.
And that, I will tell you, is above my pay grade.
Okay,
They are separate systems.
Well, we already have
We have
a
that
general
now,
pension fund.
Right.
General pension
Okay.
fund's for everybody that's not sworn.
It's not sworn.
Okay,
So there's
all right.
2 pensions,
But it's a.
and the city pension fund is healthy.
Right.
Is what?
They also, the
General
average
pension
city
fund is
employee
just
pays
what
in
we're
over
under.
a longer period of time.
Everybody
You have
that's
more
not
time for
sworn.
the contributions to accrue additional
Yes.
value. First responder funds are always challenging because of the statistically shorter working lifespan. And disabilities is a big issue we're
Yeah,
dealing
sure.
with right now. There's lots of presumptions in the law that if you get cancer on the job caused it. You get a disability pension.
You're right.
And that adds additional burden and cost. And I don't think, it's just me talking.
Sure.
That we do have a moral obligation to our.
Absolutely.
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 Certainly.
We don't know that fire didn't cause their
That's
cancer.
right.
Right.
But we don't wanna have to litigate every case. That's my personal
Right.
opinion. But that adds additional cost and complexity. And here's the latest wrinkle, is that we're seeing a big statistical increase, still relatively small numbers, but geometrical growth in PTSD disability claims, as everyone is. And that's a difficult one.
Yeah.
So, but so far, actually, we've had good, it's been very difficult, but we've had good productive conversations with the fire union.
Good.
Police have been pretty much on board. It's been fire that's been a little more resistant. And I've done education sessions with the leadership of the fire department, the fire union, and we've agreed to some modest changes in the disability policy. In the non-job related disability. If it's job related, nobody has any qualms about it, as long as it's a legit disability. One other thing I'll mention is that a little bit unique with Chattanooga, not entirely, is that the sworn officers make the decisions on disability awards to their peers. So, and they're elected by their peers. So part of their job as fiduciaries of the plan is to evaluate these disability claims. They have professional opinions, they have doctors and, evaluations, but at the end of the day, it's the sworn officers on the fund, and occasionally the non-sworn people get pulled in if it's gonna be a difficult case, or, it might be a close call or something. I've participated in only one in the time I've been on board, but, so all of those additional challenges, I think, but to your point, I think it does make sense to kind of lean on the argument that, just like our military veterans, that
Yes.
there is sort of an obligation to
Right.
to do a little bit more
Yes.
above and beyond. And because I think we can demonstrate that we're on a constructive path. It's a big bite for the city to take, there's just no question about it. But they always have stepped up every single year that I've been involved. And if we follow the plan and everything kind of goes more or less according to plan, we hit those targets. And if you look back 10 years, as I said, we're really still pretty close to those original projections, even 10 years later. So,
Hey, Chris.
Yeah, you have something else.
Yeah, kind of talking about some types of reform. And I've had several in the fire department ask me about a capped benefit plan. In other words, meaning, we have some in the fire department that say, they'll hit a higher rank chief, for instance, for the last year or two, of their service, and then that's what their benefit becomes based on, as opposed to capping everybody like at a captain's rate of pay.
Right, sure.
What kind of difference would that make in helping us catch up to the,
So that's
to
a
the
good,
80%.
that's a good question. I'd have to have the actuary do some work on that, but I'll tell you, I reread the council's legislation granting the pay raises in September, whenever it was, and I was looking at the list of ranks,
yeah,
and there's not as many chiefs and deputies as I kind of thought there were, as I just assumed, so I don't know. I mean, it's certainly something we can look at.
and what, do we know the average rank of a fire or police when they
I mean,
retire?
I don't, but the actuary probably does, or maybe somebody in the department knows probably. I'm sure.
I don't know, I've been asked that question
Yeah,
before.
sure.
I mean, obviously, it's to everybody's benefit that this fund is healthy and, you know, I'd love to see it up to maybe 70% before I get out of here at least, you know, but,
We'll hold you to that.
well,
And I don't know if that's improving the fund or you staying on longer.
I might be a very old man, but
What would a 2 to 3% COLA every year for sworn only do to the pension fund?
Well, we're doing 1.5 now. You know, it would be, basically just think of it as an additional 1.5% raise every year,
Okay.
basically. And since we hadn't factored much in terms of annual raises in with the actuarial assessment, this goes back to a point I was gonna make earlier before I lose my train of thought. We did 2 big raises because we fell so far behind.
Yeah.
But those were not anticipated by the actuary before they came down the pike. They happened because we had to. But if we were able to do 2% a year, or whatever it is, that would equate to 20% every 5 years, then the actuary could build that in, and it would be part of the projections.
Okay.
I didn't want to lose sight of that.
Okay.
That was gonna be my question. So I'm glad
you're
you
talking about,
mentioned that.
a COLA though, right?
Yes, right, I wanted to go back and backtrack on what I meant to say earlier. But that would be equivalent to an additional increase in salary.
Basically, what you're doing is adding whatever that number is, you're adding 1.5% to it every year.
Every year, right. So if you were to go back to my example with the
Yeah.
guy with the one-man pension plan.
Right, yeah.
It's 45,000 this year, it's 45,800 or whatever next
Right.
year, and it just goes up. And that would be equivalent to that. And by the way, that 1.5% is factored into the actuary's projections, because it's set.
So if we add another 1.5%,
Well,
He just cranks
basically
it
just
up.
crank it up to.
and it's compounded, obviously.
Right,
every
right.
year, so.
But then again, that's all the actuary's responsibility. Let me back up. First, I just wanted to touch on the fund's doing actually great. We hit the actuarial numbers that I gave you were based on the value of $370 million at the end of 2025, which was his best guess, because we didn't have full numbers yet. If you look down at the lower right-hand corner there, that box, we actually ended the year at 400 million, 399. And as of today, we're north of 400 million. We're at 405-ish, something like that, which puts us at about 64% funded. Now, you know, we don't take that to the bank, right? I'm just saying that the numbers have been better than the estimates for the last couple of years. They'll be worse than the estimates sometime, maybe next year, who knows? But let me go back and touch on how we get to that point, because this kind of goes back to Chip, your very first question. There are really 2 components of this when you look at the city's contribution every year. So the line number 4 is called the normal cost. Now what that is the, well, let me look at the top line. The total normal cost, first of all, that's how much you would have to contribute this year if the pension was fully funded. Okay, that's called the normal cost. That's just to satisfy obligations you incurred since last year, going forward forever. So if the fund was fully funded, that normal cost would be $10 million.
I don't understand what you're telling me right now.
Okay, if you started out fresh from scratch and you started a police department and it had no money in it, but you offered them the same pension we offer, and there were the same number of sworn officers, you would have to add $10 million to that fund this year to fund the pension for the next 30 years, for the rest of those guys. That's just this year, that's just what they accrue this year, right?
Okay,
So next year you'll do it again, and it'll be more, because you'll have higher salaries, you maybe have more people. But that normal cost is what it costs to keep the fund fully funded if it's already fully funded. Probably the best way to think of it. If you were 100% funded, you would contribute $10 million to the fund this year. This was last year's number, I'm just showing you an example. Does that make sense?
Yes.
$10 million more, you're saying?
That would be the total contribution
So
So-
just
for just this year.
10 million.
We're already,
26 million,
Well,
so,
I'm gonna get there.
oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna get there.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm
So I just
working
wanted to
it
set
out.
the stage.
Okay.
So
okay.
the normal cost is just what you put in, just if everything is status quo and everything is healthy and you're just covering the new expenses you accrued for 1 year of fire and police.
oh, okay,
Okay.
okay.
Okay?
This is in fairy tale land, right?
Yes, right, exactly. This is through the looking glass, okay?
Okay, we're in
But
fairy tale.
theoretically, right, if everything was exactly right and everybody retired on time and they lived exactly the right amount of time,
Okay,
and we made exactly 6.75%, then that would cover all the future obligations that we incurred this year. That's called the normal cost.
okay.
Now, the cops and firemen pay some of that. That's line 3. So the city's normal cost is line 4. Okay, so again, if everything was cool, that's all we would be out. However, everything isn't cool. So that unfunded liability, the
52,
yeah,
okay,
we amortize that over 30 years. You
Okay.
can't come up with it all in 1 year.
no, we
But
can't.
the rules say you gotta do it over 30, so you put in enough every year, over 30 years to make up that difference.
Okay,
And then every year you go back and recompute that, and you extend it another year, so it's a rolling 30 years.
so like hopefully next year it won't be 252, it may be
Be somewhat
preferably
less.
225,
Right.
hopefully, or
That's
something
the
like
theory.
that.
Right,
Okay,
exactly.
okay,
So, in order to amortize that unfunded liability, if you go down, that's line number 8.
okay,
So that $19-20 million is this year's down payment on funding that deficit over the next 30 years.
okay,
Does that make sense?
yes.
Add them together, line 10 is the city's contribution.
So first is what we would pay if everything was fairy tale land. Everything was great, we'll pay.
Exactly,
However,
right.
we are underfund, well, we have an unfunded liability. Because of that, we're adding the 19 million to
Exactly.
that, okay. to
That's
get
this
that.
year's payment
This
on
year.
a 30-year payoff of that deficit to get
Right.
back to 100%.
Okay,
Now, again, it's a rolling target, right? We
Right.
redo this every year, and we don't want to get to 100%. Austin PD is 110% funded. Don't ask me why.
oh, you said I couldn't even.
Don't,
I'm like,
I
what?
don't know. It doesn't make any sense, because it means they're over-contributing.
Yeah,
Oh, and it's
I
taken out.
don't understand it. And the guys that I've met from their fund don't really understand it either. It's just their policy.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah, it is. They don't know
I
why
mean,
they.
they're not the decision makers, right? They're just the
Right.
guys sitting around the room like I do. But,
Wow.
as I said, the city of Dallas just entered into a new agreement with the city. Nobody's happy. It's gonna be significant cuts in benefits. But they were 30% funded, now they're 36, but they're never gonna get back the whole. I mean, the city's contribution is if they were the same size as us, their contribution's like $45 million, and they're making 20 million of it. They're not making it. So they fall farther behind. That's what happened in Illinois, in Chicago and the state of Illinois. They didn't make their required contribution every year, and they got deeper and deeper in the hole. And that's why I always try to mention to council how important it is to recognize the council has always made at least the minimum, the determined contribution.
That is good. That
It is good,
as I
and people
kinda-
need to know
As
that.
I kind of listen to it and listen
Yeah.
to, it's like, we do try in
There's
Chattanooga
no
to take
question,
care of our
that
people.
one or two
here.
years, it's been a little more than that, because the parking fees or court fees or whatever came in
Right.
a little higher.
Right.
So far, does this all make some sense on how it works?
Yes, this is
Thank you very
fantastic,
much.
yeah. And
So-
I've been on council and I needed this education session again.
so is there a projection of like the next 10 years for the city's, what the city's
Yes.
contribution would look like?
Our actuary does that.
So where is that?
It's,
slide?
I will tell you that the number goes up, but the percentage of payroll goes down, because we're paying more people. We're paying more money, so the dollar value goes up, and I don't have it in front of me, because we're still working on trying to
So,
refine.
so we we can expect to see a larger than $26 million contribution.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. As everything goes up, inflation for one thing, and, you know, that's, the cost of everything goes up. You add more people to the payroll, because you're gonna add more cops and firemen, more firemen especially.
Yeah.
Right,
Then the contribution's gonna go up. The normal contribution is gonna go up, right?
okay.
The normal cost, because you have more
More
people in the
people.
plan, and you're paying them a higher salary.
Did you say you don't have those numbers?
I have some preliminary numbers, but we won't really have their latest guess until they finish the annual report.
Have you got them yet, Weston? Do we know?
Until I think we got it in May last year.
Yeah, something like that. We were just talking, I was trying to remember when they do the valuation. It was
So how do
May or
you know
June.
what
It was
number,
early May.
how do you know what number to plug in?
We do a best guess until we get it. If you'll remember last year, we kind of, we're conservative with what it is. And then when we get the final number, we true it up. And then last year, we used it to offset some additional costs. I think we actually put it into the contingency bucket that we set aside, the $5 million or whatever that we had, in the initial budget submission, we added it to that bucket, I believe.
And the guess will be fairly close. I mean, it's order of magnitude, so I mean, it won't be off 5% either way, probably.
We always start with a 6%. I think I say always. The last 2 years, which is what I had, it's a 6. We budget a 6% increase, and it's
So
usually- usually
you're
six-
saying 6% more than the 26 million is what you'd estimate for the 27 year? Is that what you're saying?
So, and usually it's some number less. I think I talked to our general pension, and they thought it may be 3 or 4%. They're still working on their finalizing their numbers as well.
So that number starts to get pretty big though after a while,
It
Chris.
does, no
I mean-
question. But as a percentage of payroll, it goes down. Which, I mean, that's counterintuitive, it doesn't
That is,
matter.
I mean, that's really irrelative to,
It's not entirely irrelevant, because you want it to go down to 0% of payroll. Theoretically, there's a top-out point where the actual absolute number starts to come down too, once you've hacked away enough at the unfunded liability.
Oh, that's right. Okay,
And again, you're right, it's
that's right.
la land, it's all projections, but, you know,
Well-
but there's some projections you
I
know,
mean, you've got to live with projections.
you have no choice, because that's the nature of a pension accounting. You're making, everything about it is an assumption, except the current census. You know how many cops and firemen there are this year. But you've got to guess how many you're gonna have next year.
How far out do you project a 6% increase?
Well, I'm
I
not.
mean, at some point, that's got to,
Well, that's what I say, at some
Chris?
point, when you've hacked away at the unfunded liability enough, that absolute number starts coming down instead of up. So let's say it goes 26, 27, 28, whatever the number is. It gets to 35 million, and then the next year is 32, and so forth, because you're approaching paying down, and the differential, the percentage of the unfunded liability gets smaller as you've hacked away at it.
but what I'm asking is, how many years do you anticipate a 6% increase?
Well, and I'm not telling you 6%, because I don't know. I mean, he's just saying that's the rule that they've used just for estimation until we get the actual valuation.
Well, it must be pretty close if we're using it.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the ballpark.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about, last year it may have been a decent amount lower, I can't remember.
It was a
It came
little,
quite a bit lower, but this year, with the raises.
with the raises,
We
it's,
may be
yes.
right at 6%, we're not
Right.
sure, so.
So anyway, let's just say it's 6%. And again, that's just, we're just pulling kind of a number from, that we've used as a
So you-
placeholder.
So is that what that 2032 number is when we think we crest?
I would say probably in that neighborhood.
2033?
Yeah, that's the year that we get to 70% funded, if, again, if everything plays out according to plan. But the actuary has numbers, and I can get you a better estimate
Okay.
of when we think it'll crest. And I know that the percentage of payroll starts dropping almost right away. In fact, this, it's 50% of payroll this year. I think the preliminary numbers I saw were about 50 or 51 for next year and 49 the next year. And, because the payroll has gone up dramatically with the raises. But at some point, the actual number, the 26 million, however big that number gets, starts coming down as you get closer to paying down the unfunded liability.
Okay. And then, so, could you just walk me through kind of processes in regards to, so I did text Chief Chambers to ask what was the majority rank of,
Yeah,
of CPD?
yeah.
And he says mostly police officers, and I know
Okay.
they're bringing in new officers, so.
Sure.
How long does it take for them to get, they get hired, they get into the pension? Is it is there like a percentage that they're paying as time goes on until they're 100% vested? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you off the top of my head the vesting schedule on that.
Okay.
It's in the plan document.
But it is a schedule that they,
It is a
okay,
schedule.
okay.
And if they decide to leave before they're fully vested, their contributions are refunded to them. Their
Oh,
own
okay.
personal contribution that they put in.
Okay.
They can roll it into wherever they end up going.
Is it 5 years, Weston?
I think the fire and police is 10 years.
I wanna say 10.
I think it's 10 years.
Before
Because,
the-
general pension is 5.
General, five,
Okay, so
okay.
general's
But I
5,
wanna say it's 10 years.
Okay.
I think it's 10.
You
before
know,
they're
sometimes-
100% vested in,
Yeah,
okay.
right. And again, they're only vested in the benefit they've accrued. So they, they don't get their full pension.
Right.
Just
Because they haven't worked 25 or 30 years, but they're vested in 10 years worth of their pension.
Okay,
So it's all theirs to, they can choose to defer. They can't take the money until they hit eligible retirement age.
okay,
But they know they're vested. And they have some choices. They can take their contributions out and walk away. They can wait until they hit 25 years or whatever the age is, 60 years old, to begin taking their vested benefits. But it'll only be based on their accrued service.
for those years they.
Yeah, so it'll be a much smaller check than if they had worked the whole 30 years.
Okay, thank
Right.
you so much.
So, and I hope I answered your question about the transition to a 401K.
You did. I think that and you explained it in a way that I can explain it to others. I knew my explanation always is it's going to be expensive. That's really why I landed. But
It's gonna be expensive, and it's gonna be less favorable to the sworn officers.
It
Now,
is.
all the rest of us in life, in private enterprise, that's what we have. We have defined contribution plans, and it's on us.
It is.
Yeah.
But, and then it kinda comes down to that moral
Do
question
we
of,
owe them more?
these guys are going into burning buildings and
Yes.
chasing down bad guys, and I'm not willing to do that.
I'm not, and that's why I support them 100%. I am not.
I'm probably the guy he's chasing.
So yeah, it was good, and it was which is why I almost primarily stayed. Was like I wanted to ask you that because I get it often, and a lot of times I'm like, well, it's gonna cost a lot of money. I know that, but then the
That's a good
but
answer.
also it is, do we owe them more? Because we do owe them more.
Well,
Like,
that's my personal opinion. Same thing with my dad, who was in the Marine Corps,
I'm not doing it.
I couldn't serve.
I'm not doing it.
Yeah, I'm not doing it.
I'm not.
So, I mean,
But
I
I
appreciate
appreciate
that.
you, right.
And I want to tell you one other thing too, just, it has nothing to do with the numbers, but,
Right.
I forget who even asked me to consider doing this in the first place, but it was around 2017 or 2018. And, I started working with these police and fire. Now, there've been a lot of changes, but they're elected by the members. One of the things that we had when I started, the term was 2 years, and they could run twice for a 2-year term. But in 2 years, they just learn where the bathroom is. They don't, 2 years of meeting twice a month isn't enough to get your sea legs.
Okay.
So we came to council with legislation 3 or 4 years ago to gradually change that to a 6-year term. And they're staggered. So 2 new guys come on every 2 years, and there's overlap. Now we have a lot more continuity.
Yeah.
Now, they do sometimes leave because if they get promoted to a chief rank or deputy chief, they're no longer eligible to serve because it's kind of a conflict of interest. Below a certain rank. So sometimes they roll off if they get promoted, and sometimes they just decide they don't have the time. And the reason I say that is because these guys, I don't put a dramatic amount of time into this. I do this, I'm not pension stuff, but I do investments for a living. But those guys spend 10 or 15 hours a week of their own time, unpaid, working on the pension fund, primarily on disability cases. I mean, it's a huge amount of time that they put into this thing. And the only 2 guys that get any compensation is like a $200 a month stipend for the 2 officers, the president and vice president of the board, who have to do all the filing and reports and everything. So I have developed such a tremendous respect for these guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now I'm totally prejudiced about, my moral obligation to
Yeah,
take
yeah.
care of these guys,
Sure.
because I hear these stories, they come in that sometimes the fire truck is parked right outside the pension office and they're idling and he's got his radio and he may have to jump out and
Yeah.
go take a call. And these guys are totally focused and they understand that all the trustees have a fiduciary duty to the fund. They're legally obligated to do what's in the best interest of all the plan participants, which means all the sworn officers in the fire and all the retired, retired first responders and their spouses if they were successors to the benefit. So, it's changed my attitude. Once upon a time, I used to think, well, shoot, we should just do a 401K. And I do not believe that anymore. My attitude has changed. And I'm also convinced now, which I wasn't 100% convinced in 2018, that the numbers will work if we stick to the plan.
Okay.
Now, that, again, you gotta sell it to your constituents every
Right,
year
right.
in the budget.
Well, it works with a 6% increase in contributions every year.
Right, that's what I'm saying, that it's a big nut to crack, it's a lot to ask, but council has always done it. Going back, and that is not true of every city or every state in the country. I have mentioned Illinois, but that's the worst case. Mississippi's pretty bad, where they just raided the pension. They didn't have the money, and so they didn't make that $26 million contribution. They put 10 in, because that's all they could do. And every year they fall, the behinder they get every year, because they're not hitting the number. And first thing you know, then you got a crisis. And now what do you do? And, it's not sustainable on its own, and it's too expensive to change it.
Right, so we stuck with it. And if everybody that's vested could retire, it'd be a problem.
Yeah.
It'd be a problem, okay.
There was, you guys know this, I'm sure well from talking to the chiefs, there was a big morale problem. We had a huge attrition problem, so I don't think there's much dispute that the raises were necessary.
Right, yeah,
But it definitely comes with an additional cost over and above the salaries
right, right,
for the benefits.
okay.
Chip, you got anything else?
Wow.
Well, other than another lesson on how the treasury bonds work, and you've explained this to me 100 times.
Okay. Now,
So when that yield goes up, they
Yes.
become less attractive.
right, what you're already holding. So let me put it to you this way. Think about bond prices and interest rates as a teeter-totter.
So right now, they're running at about a 4 and
Let's
3.
just say 4. Let's say at 10 years, it's 4.2 something, I don't know, let me check this one. So let's say you went out today and you bought a 10-year treasury bond. And it's gonna pay you let's say 4%, just round numbers, for the next 10 years. And then you're gonna get your money back, and it's guaranteed, because it's a government obligation. So yeah, that's a whole nother 2-hour conversation, I grant.
Okay,
Say
Talk
that with a straight face.
Talk about fairy tales. right?
Say that with a straight face.
I tried, but I just couldn't get it. But let's just assume
Okay.
that you're gonna get your money back in 10 years. So you're gonna make 4% for 10 years, and that's that. You don't have to worry about it, you can sleep at night. Well, so next year, the Fed cuts interest rates, and a 10-year treasury bond next year is paying 3%, hypothetically, all right? So if you went out and bought a brand-new 10-year bond next year, you're gonna get 3%. Yours pays 4%.
So the 4% becomes more attractive.
Exactly. If you want to turn around and sell that to somebody, you're gonna get a premium for it. But that shows up on your statement because it's priced every day. It's marked to market. So the value of an outstanding bond rises when interest rates fall generally. The same thing happens in reverse. What happened in 2022, the bond market crashed because all these bonds were paying close to zero. There was a time where 10-year treasury yields dropped to 0.5%
So nobody
in
wants it,
21.
basically.
Yeah, so if you had a bond paying 0.5% for the next 10 years, the next year, a 10-year treasury was paying 5. You got hammered. Your bonds fell by 40% in value, 30%. The longer out in duration, the worse it is. A short-term bond price doesn't move that much. A 30-year bond, it can swing a lot. So that's what happens with existing bonds if you hold them in your portfolio. You know, you're buying new bonds every year, you're gonna get whatever the market interest rate is. But a year from now, that could either go up or down depending on what market rates do. That makes sense?
Good.
I mean, just think about, think about the opportunity cost. You spent $100 on a bond, it's gonna pay you 4%, but now all of a sudden, you could have bought a bond that's paying you 5%. So what do? How do you make that switch? Well, you gotta dump the one you've got, and in order to sell it to some other sucker, you gotta discount it.
Right?
Now, they're not suckers, they know, because people buy bonds at a discount on purpose, deliberately, in the secondary market, because they're betting maybe interest rates are gonna fall some more, or whatever. But because you buy it at a discount, here's the other twist that'll really blow your mind, I'm sure. You were making 4%. Now the market rate went up to 5%. In order to sell your bond, you have to cut the price. But the guy who's buying that is still gonna get 5%, because he's paying less for it. Right? So the market makes that decision. You have to discount it enough so that a buyer will make an equivalent yield to what he could get with a brand-new bond paying the same thing. That helps?
Okay.
I know we'll have to talk about it
I
again.
know.
It's good though.
Y'all got anything else?
No.
Thank
Hey, I'm
This
so
was
sorry I screwed up the
fantastic.
time, man, I
It is
apologize.
fine.
Thank you very much.
Helpful.
Did you start it too?
I thought I was starting at 2:30. And
Okay.
Chip called and said, where in the heck are you?
I had 2 on my calendar and I didn't know it was 1:30, so I.
Oh, that's
So I
okay.
Yeah,
forgot.
you
Yeah,
missed
all
that.
right,
Yeah,
I'm
you
good.
missed that.
I was,
Okay, good.
I told him, I was in Chicago and I put it on my calendar and somehow it got screwed up. And
All
it doesn't
good. Well, I
usually-
read mine wrong too, so I don't feel as bad.
Give me a call
Yeah,
anytime.
you want that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. This was fantastic.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks.
guys. And
Thanks a lot.
again, we really appreciate the support we get, because council's been great about this. And I enjoy coming to council and talking about how we're
Yeah.
doing, even in those years when the numbers weren't all that great.
It was rough and tough. It's just fine. But it says a lot about the council, especially because I've only been here, this is just my second term, but like to Chip and all.